Est-ce que tu sais comment on dit en français « tax the rich » ?
Et taxer les riches, non? Oui, c'est bon, non? C'est correct?
Lui, c'est Gary Stevenson. Il est l'un des plus ardents défenseurs d'une taxation plus juste des ultra-riches. Mais avant ça, il a été trader et a vu de l'intérieur le cynisme destructeur de la finance et du capitalisme. J'ai eu la chance de l'interviewer à l'occasion de la sortie en France de son best-seller « Confession d'un trader repenti ». Bon visionnage.
Comment est-ce que tu as opéré cette transition entre ta position de trader le plus rentable pour Citibank dans le monde à celle d'un avocat, d'un défenseur de cette lutte pour une taxation plus juste des ultra-riches?
So for me, it came from the trading. It came from the trading, right? So I started working in 2008, which was, of course, the crisis. My job is to predict the future of interest rates. So like for those younger people who don't know, but before 2008, interest rates in Europe were like 4 or 5%. And then very quickly they go to 0%. So then my job is when will interest rates come back up? Which was kind of a bet on when will the economy recover, go back to normal. And everybody thought, in 2008, zero interest rates totally new. And everybody thought like, oh, that's going to be so powerful because we never seen zero interest rates in Europe before. And we're going to have a big recovery in 2009. Didn't happen. Then in 2009, big recovery in 2010. Didn't happen. In 2010, everybody's saying it will be 2011. Didn't happen. So by the beginning of 2011, I had seen like these 4 years of phenomenal bad prediction from like the best paid economists in the world. And I became just fascinated in understanding this simple question of why are our economists like always wrong on the big questions on the economy. I studied economics at the London School of Economics, like very prestigious university. And I started to ask myself these questions and talk to people. I became obsessed with understanding what is wrong with the economy, what is wrong with economists and our understanding of the economy. And I came to the conclusion, which I still believe today, that economists are simply not thinking about inequality of wealth. And while they are not thinking about it, while they are not looking at it, it's increasing really quickly. And that's not just the abstract concept. That means that ordinary people, ordinary French families, ordinary British families are losing their wealth. And that's why my parents' generation could easily own properties and my generation cannot. And that wealth is being transferred to the richest people in these countries, the richest people in the world. And I could see straight away that's going to keep going. That's not going to get fixed because nobody was talking about it. No action was being taken against it. And if ordinary families can't run a balanced budget when they own their own home, they definitely can't when they don't own their own home. And if governments can't run a balanced budget when they're not massively in debt, they definitely can't when they are massively in debt. So I could see this would get worse. And that's what I bet on. And that is exactly how I became Citibank's most profitable trader in the world in 2011. So it was through the trading that I realized that living standards would get worse and worse and worse. So, and I didn't quit immediately, and it took me a couple of years. But the question is, if you walk down the street and you see somebody's house is on fire, what do? You ring the fire station, you knock on the window, you knock on the door, you throw stones, you shout, you scream, That's what I saw in my job. My job was to be the best economist in the world at understanding what was going to happen in the future of our economy. And what I saw was deepening, worsening poverty for ordinary families. I don't come from a rich background. So it's ordinary families like my family, like the families I grew up with. I could see back in 2011 that was going to get worse. And here we are 15 years later. I think we can clearly see that things have gotten worse.
Right.
And I want to stop that, So that's why I quit the job. And that's why I do the work that I do now of, coming here, talking to you, trying to convince the French public that unless we take action on this growing inequality, things will get worse.
Et tu disais que les économistes ne s'intéressent pas aux inégalités. Et donc toi, tu as pris ce rôle. Comment tu expliques ce désintérêt de la part de la discipline?
I think two reasons.
Ça, ouais.
I think one is not many people from poor backgrounds are nowadays able to get into especially the elite universities for economics and the elite positions and the elite jobs. I think if you look at US PhDs, economics is the least representative of class, subject in the whole of the country. So poor people are generally not getting in. So of course, if you ask very rich people, like, is inequality a problem? They're probably not going to be interested. But the other thing is the way that economics is taught and designed at universities nowadays. It's become an incredibly mathematized and mathematical discipline. The reality is, I've been 3 years at London School of Economics, 2 years at Oxford. We're not talking about the housing crisis. We're not talking about the cost of living crisis. We're not talking about why people can't get good jobs, afford a family, get financial security. What we are doing is maths. We are doing simultaneous equations. We are doing linear algebra. We're inverting matrices. We're doing incredibly complicated maths. But we are doing maths on models, very complicated economic models, which have no inequality. So the vast majority of work done by economists in universities is on what we call, in English, representative agent models, probably quite similar in French, I suspect, which is a model where rather than look at 60 million French people, we look at one average French person. And when you look at the average, of course, if you look at just the average, there can be no inequality. So the truth is, the way that we are teaching economics in universities, imagine you are a prestigious academic economist. You've done 3 years undergrad, 5, 6 years postgrad, 3, 4 years postdoc. You've done 20 years now, 25 years becoming a master of these incredibly complicated mathematical models that include no inequality. And the public are getting angry because living standards are falling. And they're coming to you for answers. And somebody says, hey, I think it's because of inequality. Well, what are you going to do? Because you've never looked at inequality in your whole career. You're going to say, it better not be inequality, because otherwise I'm fucked, because I'm supposed to be an expert in inequality and I know nothing meaningful about inequality. So I think it's coming from the universities. I think, we're starting to see positive signs. I think you're incredibly lucky here in France because you have Gabriel Zucman, who is one of the world's preeminent experts on inequality within economics. And we're starting to see him and people around him, of course Piketty as well, who are doing this work and talking about the effect of inequality. But it must be recognized that these guys are the exception. The majority of economists are really not able to meaningfully talk about inequality because they have never studied it.
Et tu parlais du background social, des origines sociales des économistes qui peuvent influencer leur manière de faire l'économie, de voir l'économie. Comment est-ce que tu penses que ton background social à toi, tes amis, ta famille, l'endroit où tu as grandi, est-ce que ça a été important en fait comme déclencheur, comme eye-opener de la situation?
For me, super important. So, I studied maths and economics at the London School of Economics, right? So when I start my job, 21 years old, I'm just a classic economics student guy. I want to do the maths. That's how I've been trained to think about it. And there's a story in my book. So I start working in 2008 and 2009, did really well, made a lot of money. 2010, I made my first big loss. And in 1 week in 2010, I lost for the bank $8 million. And it's the first time I ever lost a lot of money in my life. And,
c'est beaucoup.
Yeah, 2010, I was 23 years old, $8 million, a lot of money. And, so obviously I was shocked, and I did, my instinct was to go back to the books. And it's funny now to think about it, but I started to bring my economics textbooks into the trading floor.
Really?
Yeah. And I start to, when I have free time, I'm reading these textbooks. And so I was really lucky. So nowadays, there's not many people from working class backgrounds on the trading floors. It's mainly people from rich families, elite universities. But I worked with this one guy in the book. He's called Billy, who was a absolute genius. One of the smartest guys I've ever met.
Yeah.
From Liverpool, a working class town in the northwest of England, didn't go to university. He got a job as a cashier at Halifax, a high street bank, and when he was 16, I guess, and he worked his way up to, by the time I meet him, he must be in his mid to late 40s. He becomes one of Citibank's most senior traders, and he was an amazing trader. He was just so good, predicted the financial crisis, predicted the recovery, amazing trader. And I was sitting next to him at the time, and a couple of days he sees me reading these books, and I can see he's shaking his head. And then eventually he just stands up and just slams the book, bam, into the bin, out of my hands. The bin falls on the floor, and he just says to me, "What the fuck are you doing? Look around you. You're here on the trading floor. Does it look like a fucking library to you, right? Listen, I know you've lost a lot of money, and I know you've been to these fancy universities, but the answer to what's happening here is not in those books. If you want to know what's happening in the economy, go home and talk to your mum about her financial situation. You know, walk down the high street and see what shops are closing down, what shops are opening up. Look at what's being advertised on the tube. You know, talk to your friends and their families about their financial situation. If you want to understand the economy, the time comes when you have to put the books down and go look at the economy in the real world." And I think this is a massive reason of why I was able to correctly understand that living standards weren't going to get better after 2011. Because these guys who I was working with, you know, from rich families, elite private schools, elite universities, their whole social circle is rich people.
Yeah.
And from young, really. So
they're disconnected.
And that their social circle was doing really well. So for them, it's easy to look around and say, well, of course things are going to get better because we're all doing better.
Yeah.
But when I looked around my social circle in 2011, what I saw was my parents' generation, people who, my dad worked for the post office, he made £20,000 a year, ordinary person, ordinary job, can buy a house, have 3 kids, get a pension, get a retirement. You know, we were never rich.
Same here.
But he could get this basic financial security. And then when I looked at my generation, what I saw was, you know, university educated young people who would never be able to afford housing. And then right there you can see in front of your eyes the loss of the wealth holding middle class. But these guys couldn't see it because their whole milieu, like their whole community, that was getting richer. So I think, and one of the big problems we have now, because I think it's becoming less and less common that people from poorer backgrounds are able to access elite universities and elite jobs, is there are fewer and fewer people now who can see both sides of the coin. I don't think poor people realize, listen, we're here in the middle of what is going to be a massive economic crisis, the Iran war. The US stock market hit a new all-time high last week. You know, and I don't think poor people realize there has not been a single crisis in the last 20 years, 2008, 2011, COVID, the Iran war, that has not made the rich richer. And the poor don't see that the rich are getting richer, but equally, the rich don't see that the poor are getting poorer. You know, and I go on these, you know, TV channels and podcasts with fancy rich people, and they say to me, "What do you mean? Things are getting better, aren't they?" But I, in many ways, feel very fortunate to have come from that background, because I think it means I am much more capable than most people of seeing what is happening in the economy, which is this group up here are doing fantastically well. But I really believe 70-80% of people are seeing living standards really fall.
L'année prochaine, on a une élection présidentielle en France qui va être déterminante, importante. Est-ce que toi, tu fais un lien, direct ou indirect, entre ce qu'on vient de se dire là sur les inégalités et la montée des partis d'extrême droite comme Reform UK ou le Rassemblement national ici en France?
Have I got connections with the inequality guys? And do I have connections with the far-right parties?
No. Do you see connections in the falling living standards and rising inequalities and the rising of
the far right?
Yeah.
Yeah, like 100%.
100%.
100. Listen, in my opinion, okay, so I don't think living standards have fallen quite as far, quite as quickly, or quite as consistently in France as they have in the UK, but they're falling.
Yeah.
In the UK, living standards have fallen pretty consistently ever since 2008, if you look at ordinary people. They've just been falling and falling and falling. And, you know, what did we do? You know, we voted out the centre-left party. We had Labour centre-left in power, 2008. Okay, get rid of them. We bring in the centre-right party. Well, they fail, so we vote them out. We bring in the centre-left party. They're failing. You know, so, and you know, it's the same. You look in the US, you know, I'm sure it'll be the same here in France. You know, people will vote. I remember Obama campaigned on the slogan of change.
Yeah.
Hope and change. And listen, I don't hate Obama, but did he solve the living standards problems of ordinary American working people? I don't think he did. So, then we vote in Trump. Did he succeed? No. Okay, then we vote in Biden. Did he succeed? No. So we vote back in Trump. Did he succeed? He's not succeeding on living standards. And everywhere you look, it's the same all across Europe, all across the world. People have been voting centre-left, centre-right, centre-left, centre-right. And all the time, living standards for ordinary people, they can't afford homes, they can't afford families. Increasingly in the UK, and I'm sure it's happening here as well, regular people are struggling just to feed the kids and pay the bills and keep the heating on, So people will vote for sensible change 3 times, 4 times if you're lucky. But people have become convinced, and if I'm totally honest, people are correct in their belief that these centrist politicians, be they centre-right or centre-left, do not have the answer to falling living standards, and they're looking for an alternative. And the far right is there, it's well funded, they have a clear and simple message. I don't think it's true, I don't think it's right, and I think if you look at, for example, Trump, you see that it doesn't work on living standards. But the fact is, ordinary people are not economists. We can't expect them to have the answers, but they're not stupid. They know that what is happening now is not working. They're looking for an alternative. And, there's a quote from Milton Friedman, the American economist, that says, at times of crisis, the new ideas will be chosen from the ideas lying around at the time. And if you ask me, that there are only 2 obvious ideas lying around right now that are the alternatives to the centre, which is me and my lot and Zuckman saying, tax the rich, make the tax system fairer, tax wealth not work. And there is the far right saying the problem is immigrants, the problem is foreigners. And listen, I really hope we win, but we both know right now which of those voices is louder and which of those voices is better funded. Right. So we need to get an alternative, big, loud, unified alternative on the table that is not the far-right alternative. Otherwise, they will win just by default, by not being the centre. We need to get another offer on the table for the British public, for the French public, that says we understand your living standards are falling and we know why that's happening and we know how to stop it and we are going to get you out of it.
Et tu parlais d'alternatives des 2 côtés de l'échiquier. Comment tu ressens les choses par rapport aux alternatives à gauche? Là, en ce moment, au Royaume-Uni, Zach Polanski fait une bonne campagne. Il est clairement en traction dans les sondages, sur les réseaux sociaux. Est-ce que tu penses que la vague populiste d'extrême droite est en train d'arriver, peut-être pas à sa fin, mais est en train de caler, de stumbling?
Yeah. The far right?
Yeah.
I think the far right has the problem that they are now in power in America.
Yeah.
And obviously that's very visible.
Yeah.
And we can all see that it's not delivering improving living standards. And that is a big problem for the far right across the world.
Yeah.
And it's an opportunity for people on the left. And it's an opportunity that is being, pursued by Zach Polanski, the new leader of the Green Party in the UK. And he has picked up my ideas about taxing the rich and Zuckman tax and the wealth tax, and he's really pushing it. Yeah. And he's picked up big popularity and he's picked up a lot of votes from that. But, I worry it will be enough. Can he win the election? At the moment, what I'm trying to do is convince people more in the centre because, the left is there and they are supportive of it and, they always have been and they always will be. But, it's not going to be enough, 25% of the public. We need to, and, I floated around the British left for a long time, and I think Zach Polanski has done a great job in popularising these ideas about taxing the rich more. But I sometimes worry that the left does a bit too much of talking to the left. And, people on the left are going to vote for the left, and they're probably going to vote for wealth taxes, but we need to win. We need to win 30, 35, 40% of people if we're going to keep the far right out. So I think Zach Polanski's done great work, but what I try to do always is I try to keep the politics out of it. I try to focus on economics and living standards, and I try to make it as clear and as obvious as possible to your average person. Listen, the reason your living standards are falling, the reason your kids can't buy a house is growing inequality of wealth. If you do not take action on that, then your kids will continue to be poor. I think, and I worry about the growing factionalism you know, we can all see what's happening in the US, where everybody with a blue hat hates everybody with a red hat, and we can't talk to our neighbors anymore, you know, and we're scared of each other. I don't want that to happen in England. I don't want that to happen in France. You know, we need to make sure that we are able to talk to each other, but we also need to have a clear economic alternative. Because the far right, in this country, in my country, in the US, around the world, has a clear idea that they are communicating about how they're going to fix the economy. Yeah. And it's not going to work, but unless the rest of us have a clear, unified message, then it doesn't matter. Because if there's only one product in the supermarket, then you buy that product. And people are struggling out there, right? They can't feed their kids. They can't pay the bills. You know, so I don't know what it's like here. I'm not an expert on French politics, but I tell you right now, there's a lot of hatred in the UK between the centre and the left. And unless... I can imagine it's the same. Listen, unless we can find a common ground to fight on, then the far right are going to win. Listen, you know, we need to build a big coalition here, and we need to stop hating each other, because this is not football, you know. This is not a game, you know. This is really about whether people's kids and grandkids live in real serious poverty, and that has to be priority number one.
Ouais. Les personnes qu'on essaie de convaincre, parmi elles, il y en a beaucoup qui, des classes moyennes, des classes populaires, lower class also, qui défendent les milliardaires, qui défendent la hustle culture, flex culture, etc. Comment tu l'expliques? Pour toi, ça vient d'où, en fait, cette propension d'une grosse partie de la population à défendre les ultra-riches?
I think the most obvious reason is because, listen, most people want to be rich. When I was a kid, listen, so I don't come from a political background or a political family. I grew up poor, you know, like, I wasn't the poorest, but I was like pretty poor, right? I don't want to being poor is shit, mate. It's you know, I don't know what your life was like growing up. It's not easy, right? You know, it's difficult, right? You get looked down on, people look at you like you're a piece of shit, you know? You don't want to be poor, you want to be rich. So, you know, when you look at people who have made it and are rich, you're like, well, that's where I want to be. That's what I want to aspire to. And I think it's important, you know, when we communicate about this, I think sometimes the left is not good in its communication on this, you know. And, you know, we especially have the problem. When I first quit finance to try and figure out, like, how do I stop inequality from growing, I had no idea what to do. And, you know, one of the obvious places you look is the political left. Because, you know, these are the guys who are supposed to care about inequality. You know, I went and I looked at the political left, I went to meetings, and to be honest, in many cases, what I saw was a bunch of people who looked like they'd never really known poverty, you know, discussing, you know, volume 3 of Marx and talking about fucking Engels and Gramsci. I don't know who these guys are, you know what I mean? Like, so, look, I don't think we're going to get out of this by pointing fingers and saying those guys are the bad guys. You know, we've got to strip this back, clear, simple, take the God out of it, take the ideology out of it, take this post-capitalism, anti-capitalist, you get rid of that. Listen, this is what is true. If we don't stop inequality from increasing, then the average French man, the average French woman, their kids, their grandkids will live in really serious poverty. That's what we go with. That is how you win them. And you can't go around, oh, these guys are the bad guys, those guys are the bad guys. Listen, this is really serious. This is really serious. And we need to have it, just like the far right does, we need to have a simple message we can centralize on. Mm-hmm. And I think, personally, the strongest message, and I think it is the strongest message because it is clear and because it is simple, but most of all because it is true. If you do not stop inequality from increasing, it will get worse and worse and worse. And we will see more and more really serious poverty for not just the bottom 10%, but ordinary people. That is how we win this fight. And we will win that because the far right will win elections. You know, they've got a very good chance of winning here. I think, unfortunately, they probably will win in my country in the next few years. And they will cut taxes on billionaires because they are funded by billionaires. Yeah. And they will increase inequality and they will see living standards fall. And we will have predicted that in advance, because we will have said it will happen and people will see that we were right, and we will be there again with the same clear, simple message unless you stop inequality from increasing, your kids will be poor and your grandkids will be poor. I think that is how you win.
Alors moi, je suis d'accord avec toi quand tu dis qu'il faut un message clair, qui soit aussi clair que celui de l'extrême droite. Est-ce que tu ne penses pas qu'il faut aussi, en français on dit cliver, c'est-à-dire make someone the bad guy, which would be the billionaires. Comme l'extrême droite disent que les coupables sont les immigrés. Est-ce que tu penses pas qu'en plus de ce message clair sur les inégalités, etc., il y a aussi une nécessité de cliver, c'est-à-dire de s'opposer à des ennemis, quoi, des adversaires politiques?
So, I was talking about this yesterday. For me personally, I don't think that's the right way to go.
Okay.
To say, these are the bad guys, these are the bad guys. Listen, if people are scared, if people are worried, if people don't know where to go, that creates a big opportunity for political strongmen who come in and say, I'm a big, tough man or woman who can protect you. I'm on your side. I'm the guy who's on your team. That's how Donald Trump wins.
Yeah.
Donald Trump wins from an electorate who are scared and who are angry, and who don't think they can defend themselves. I really think we need to be building countries where when we look at each other, we see each other and say, listen, we're all getting screwed over here. Yeah, by the very rich. But the real guys who are winning here, it's not, when I grew up, I thought a rich person was someone making £60,000 a year. I don't know what a fucking billionaire is. I saw your video on that about the billionaires. That was good. People don't know who the billionaires are, right? And I don't think we build our way out of this by supporting this climate of fear and hatred in our countries. I think that is how the far right win. I think we need to be building stories that say, listen, you guys out there, the ordinary French people of this country, you are the guys who are going to get us out of this, and you are going to do that by working together alongside each other. And listen, that is going to mean necessarily people who are richer and people who are poorer working together. Any student of history will see any successful struggle has only ever succeeded when it has included the poor and the middle class and even some richer people. Somebody's got to fund this shit. You know what I mean? Listen, I'm out here, look, I know we're in France. I'm not here to get the guillotines out. I'm here to fix this. That's it. Listen, things are going to get worse here really quickly, and it's going to be scary and it's going to be difficult. And I don't, listen, if the British public is scared and afraid and panicking, I can't do nothing with them. And it's the same here in France, right? We need people who feel strong. Listen, so I do these videos where I say, listen, shit's going to get worse. Shit's going to get a lot worse. And I explain exactly how. And then people say, you know what? Now I feel hopeful. Because I think people can deal with shit circumstances. You know what I mean? It's happened in your country, it's happened in my country. People can deal with shit circumstances if they understand them and they see the way out. But when people panic is when they don't know what's happening and they don't see the way out. And that's when they run to these strongmen. So I think the job of people like you and people like me who have a public voice is to be real with the public. Listen, it's going to be shit. It's going to be hard, but we can fix it. Look at what happened in our grandparents' generation. My grandma was born in London, 1927. Richest city in the richest country in the history of the world. And 3 of her siblings died of tuberculosis, a preventable disease of poverty. And then within the next 50 years, her lifetime, we create a country where ordinary people like my dad can have good quality housing, good quality healthcare, good quality education, food, retirement, holiday, leisure time, right? In 50 years. So I think we need to be pointing at that and saying, listen, they did that by working together. We need to be creating societies that can work together. Out in England and across the world, we looked at things like your Gilets Jaunes movement, and we were like, look, okay, listen, it was imperfect. Of course it was imperfect, it was disorganized. But listen, these are a people who, when shit hits the fan, they say, you know what, we're going to get together and we're going to fix this. In my country, we had riots that were breaking into shops and stealing stuff. This showed a political instinct towards brotherhood and fighting for something, listen, I'm not an expert on France, right? And you can tell me whether it's true or not. This is a country the world looks to show us that when shit's hitting the fan, you guys step together and fix it. You know, and I don't think we do that by painting scary pictures on walls. I think we do that by telling the public, stand together, fight together, work together, build something better for your grandkids like your grandparents did.
Si tu essayes de convaincre la majorité de la population sur le sujet des inégalités avec une nécessité de davantage taxer les grandes fortunes, il y a souvent un contre-récit, un contre-narratif qu'on entend très vite, très souvent, qui vient souvent de la droite et des médias, qui est on peut pas. On peut pas parce qu'ils vont partir, on peut pas parce que c'est pas bon pour la croissance, etc. Comment on fait pour se battre contre ces dispositifs rhétoriques?
I mean, the first thing to say is that we did it. We did it. You know, if you go back and look at the tax regimes in this country, in my country, in the US, in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, you know, this period after, which we call the golden era of capitalism, when, you know, people like my dad and probably your dad and our grandparents were able to work regular jobs. My granddad was a bus conductor, you know, and have financial security and buy homes. That was happening under tax regimes which tax the very rich at much, much higher rates. And it wasn't a perfect tax system, you know, and I'm not saying we go back to that, but it worked and we did it. It was possible for our grandparents' generation. It's possible now. That doesn't mean that it's easy. That does not mean that it's easy. And I don't think that it's easy. And we're not going to get this today, and we're not going to get this tomorrow. But I'll go back to what I've said before. If we do not do something about this growing inequality, it will get worse and worse and worse and worse. And I want to be real with the French public, right? The kind of poverty that we saw when my grandparents were children and my great-grandparents were children, the kind of poverty that we see in very unequal countries today, like in India, for example, you know, where the average people really, really struggle, you know, desperate poverty for ordinary people. Don't fool yourself that cannot happen here. You know, go back and read, I would say Charles Dickens, but, you know, read your authors from this period, you know, from the 19th century. Yeah, exactly. You know, read what life was like here in France in the 1800s and the early 1900s, before we reduced inequality. You know, I always remember when Donald Trump used this term shithole countries, because I think when he says that, what he's saying is, oh, that's what happens in those brown countries and those black countries. It happened here. It happened here in France, it happened in the UK, in Europe. Desperate poverty for ordinary working people can happen again. You know, so who is it? JFK said, listen, we go to the moon and we do the other things, not because they're easy, but because they are hard. Listen, I'm not here telling you taxing the rich is easy. And I'm not here doing the work that I do because I think taxing the rich is easy. It's difficult. It's very difficult. If it was easy, I would have fucking done it by now. We don't do it because it's easy. We do it because it is essential to protect your grandkids from desperate poverty, all right? And countries which do not do the things that are essential because they are difficult, they fail, all right? And we've done it before. Here in Europe, right, we have done it before. We have created in this last 70 years incredibly good living standards for ordinary people, but that was not done without struggle. You know, we fight, we do the difficult things, we win. If we don't fight, then we definitely lose, I'll tell you that.
Tu mentionnais les gilets jaunes juste avant. Et je pense que dans ce mouvement, il y avait une aspiration à plus de démocratie pour être plus écouté. Ton livre et ta chaîne YouTube s'adressent à des gens ordinaires. Est-ce que tu penses qu'il y a encore suffisamment de confiance dans la démocratie pour convaincre, pour que les gens votent pour des représentants, des politiques qui seraient susceptibles de mettre en place la taxe Zuckman, par exemple? Ou est-ce qu'on est condamné à avoir des mouvements un peu insurrectionnels comme les Gilets jaunes? Est-ce que tu penses qu'on a encore l'énergie démocratique disponible pour mener cette bataille?
Listen, I can't speak for what the mood is on the streets in France because I've been here for like a day and a half, but like 100% in the UK, and I suspect here as well, faith in democracy and in politicians is at an all-time low. Like, I recognize that, 100% I recognize that. And that is one of the reasons, and listen, I share that. You know, I'm trying to get our
Right.
Labour Party to do something like the Zuckman tax, and they're incredibly reluctant to do it, and I think it's insane. I think it's incredibly hard to understand. I think it's pretty stupid of them, and I'm disappointed as well. But I don't see that as a weakness, I see that as an opportunity. I see that as an opportunity. Listen, 5-6 years ago, I was writing, articles for The Guardian. I guess the French public know The Guardian.
Yeah.
And I was like, fuck this, I'm gonna make a YouTube. Because it was obvious 6 years ago that political power was moving away from the traditional political parties, from the traditional newspapers, the traditional news channels, towards things like TikTok, things like YouTube. And I was like, you know what? I'm gonna go and I'm gonna take that space and I'm gonna take that power and I'm gonna use that power to stop this terrible thing from happening. So listen, okay, look, the public hate the politicians, I understand it. I don't sit here with my head in my hands, tearing my hair out, I say, okay, I'm gonna take advantage of that. Listen, that's what Nigel Farage does, that's what Le Pen does, that's what Bardella does. They see this lack of faith in democracy and they see, well, okay, that is a power vacuum. That is a power vacuum. And we need to see that as an opportunity. And listen, I would rather live in countries that were secure and were stable and we didn't have to worry about these things. But listen, we don't have that luxury. Okay, things are insecure. There is so much power there to be taken. Mm-hmm. There is so much, and the far right is swooping in and taking it. So you know what? I'm gonna fucking take it. But listen, it's not about just like you and me on YouTube and TikTok, right? It's that gap that has been created by politicians. It's like a complete spiritual gap. The public do not know, the French public do not know where France is going. And I could replace France with Germany, the UK, the US, right? And it's our job as creators, but it's also everybody's job. The people at home, when they're in the pub, when they're at work, when they're talking to their mates on the football team, the artists, the musicians, I know now is a scary time to be alive, but also what an amazing time to be alive, right? Listen, this continent is at a turning point. It is at a crossroads and it can go one of two ways. And that will be decided by us, not just you and me here on TikTok and YouTube. Of course, that is a part of it, but it will be decided by all of us in our conversations, in what we create, in what we put out there. And next time I come to France, I want there to be more influencers out there, and I want there to be artists, and I want there to be graffiti, I want there to be posters painted up to the walls, and I want there to be musicians, you know what I mean? We are all a part of this, and I think this idea that we have no power, that puts us in the hands of the far right and the strongmen and the billionaires. Listen, at the end of the day, we have a say in this. We have a say in this. So if the politicians have failed us, listen, this is not the first time that European politicians have failed the European public, okay? And if the politicians fail us, then we, the people, will fix it. Mm-hmm. Were the politicians any better in the early 1900s? No, they weren't. The workers did it. You know what I mean? So, okay, listen, we don't have workers' movements and we don't have factories. And yeah, it has to be YouTube and TikTok instead. That is the new town hall. Then that's what we use.
Ouais.
That we use what we have at the time.
Deux dernières questions. Comment tu articules ce combat pour réduire les inégalités et mieux répartir les richesses avec aussi l'énorme crise climatique, l'énorme crise environnementale, la chute de la biodiversité, etc. C'est un sujet dont tu parles moins dans ton livre ou dans tes vidéos. Est-ce que c'est quelque chose auquel tu penses quand même?
Yeah, so first of all, the environmental crisis and climate change is I'm not an expert on these things, but it's important.
Yeah.
I'm not going to, of course it's important. So in 2015, my brother was a big supporter of the UK Green Party. Uh-huh. And this was when I was just starting my journey on how do we do something about inequality. And I'd only been back in the country for less than 1 year. I didn't even know what I was doing. We had an election in 2015 and my brother asked me to knock on doors for the UK Green Party. And I'm not a member of the Green Party. Now the UK Green Party is the most supportive of taxing the rich. But at the time, they weren't known for that. It's mainly ecological issues.
Yeah.
And I thought immediately, this is interesting because if you look at the green movement, the ecological movement, and also the tax the rich movement, they're both movements which definitely back then were being opposed by exactly the kind of people who would be most hurt if they failed. The poor, basically. And I just thought it'd be interesting to see what happens if I like knock on people's doors and say, why don't you vote Green? And I knocked in an area called Stratford, which is in East London, close to where I grew up, and it's a poor area. I knocked on doors, handed out leaflets, so why don't you vote for the Greens? You probably know what people said. People said, listen, I can't pay my fucking bills. I can't keep them. I'm struggling to, I'm going to lose my car. You know what I mean? And you're telling me I shouldn't have a car. How do I take my kids to school? People are struggling. And listen, look, I'm not telling anybody like who's working on the green crisis, don't do that, because of course it's important.
Yeah.
But the fact is, we are living in a time of relatively rapidly falling living conditions. And this is not just relative poverty, this is real poverty, There will be mothers watching this video that have skipped meals today to feed their kids. And I'm not just talking about one or two, there will be thousands of mothers in this country who are doing that. And that's growing every day, right? So listen, I understand these things are important, but from my experience of going out and knocking those doors,
people can't pay attention
until and unless ordinary people feel comfortable and confident that they can comfortably feed their kids and that their kids can afford to have kids of their own, they're not going to have the space for this.
Yeah.
So listen, if you want to get anybody on board with the ecological crisis, you have to be ready to offer them something on stopping their living standards from falling first.
Yeah, I agree.
And I don't think anything else works.
Yeah. Last question, Gary. If there is one thing you would like to say to French people, qu'est-ce que tu leur dirais? What would it be?
Listen, I don't live that far away from France. I'm over in London, and I've been studying French since I was a kid. And the French are very slow to translate my book, so I haven't had time to get here yet. But I was so excited to come to France, like honestly, because you've got this guy, Gabriel Zucman here, which I guess I don't need to introduce because he's well known with the French public. And I have been speaking to Gabriel Zucman on email since 2014. And you've got Piketty here as well. They took me to see Piketty. I was like a fanboy. Because, these are the only guys who have been working on inequality, the world leaders, right? And you have, over in my country, they say, oh, you're idiots, it will never going to work. None of the serious economists support it. And you have the world's most serious economists here doing it, So, it's not all on you, it's not all on the French public. But, I want to build relationships here, specifically in France. And I don't think there's a country in the world that is more important right now in this fight. And I'm not just saying that, to flatter. That's what I genuinely believe. Listen, I could be, my book's out all over Europe. I could be anywhere, but this is the place I'm going to keep coming because this is the center of the fight now. And you're incredibly lucky to have these leading economists here, and to have your history of, fighting for equality, which is a part of your national myth, your national history, right? But I'm going to do it too. It's as simple as that. And we don't live in a Marvel movie. This is not Gabriel Zucman saves the world. This is not Gary Stevenson saves the world. You know what I mean? Most of the world's richest and most powerful people are going to be against us. The only power that ordinary people have ever had to protect themselves from the rich and the super rich is power in numbers. And they only use that power if they work together. But listen, we have the people. If everybody out there convinces one other person, then we get everyone. Listen, I'm going to keep fighting. And I know there are people here who are going to keep fighting. And I promise you this, we might not win tomorrow. We might not win this year. We might not win next year. But if enough of us fight, then we will win. And I would ask for the support of our French brothers.
Yes, of course. Thanks a lot, Gary. It was great. Yeah.
Voilà, l'interview est terminée, j'espère qu'elle vous a plu. Si le sujet vous intéresse, vous pouvez suivre Gary Stevenson sur les réseaux sociaux et vous procurer son livre « Confession d'un trader repenti » disponible en librairie. Et enfin, pour voir d'autres vidéos pour vivre moins con, n'hésitez pas à vous abonner. Merci et à bientôt.